Oh, it's a new, it's a new vision video, but it's not the podcast. No, 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 no. Just like MSI, I'm doing one for every one of the days that get played. So like that, you get a little bit of everything and a bit of thoughts, some more details that come along with what I think is happening or my thoughts on every game so far that has played. So that like that, some of the stuff that we gloss over, there's at least something that's being talked about, even for some of the more mundane games that still have an implication over the overall tournament. Now, if this is the first video that you're watching of us, hi, my name is Sam. I'm one of the three creators of the video of our channel here at Vision Denial, and I make a lot of the more detailed content that goes around on, as aside from the podcasts that are our Vision Denial podcast or our World Watch podcast. And this is going to be our Worlds 2021, the video series that I would call our daily sweeps. Workshopping name. That's the name I picked, right? Yeah, it's our daily sweeps, for like the sweepers. Now, what would that entail, you would ask? Well, that would entail me mostly reading off my notes that I put for myself. I do brief one paragraph notes for each of the games, and I may extrapolate a little bit more as I'm reading them. But I thought, what better way to really go through my thoughts instead of just rambling off of random tiny bit notes, but more of my more constructed thoughts in those little paragraphs that I write. So, without further ado, let's get into day one of Playins for our first episode of Daily Sweeps. Now, if it's anything new for all of you, I will also be putting at the bottom over here the highlights of the games, courtesy of the Vietnamese League, who do daily highlights of every game, or who do highlights of all the games as they release. They're fantastic. You should follow the Vietnamese League. They produce great content most of the time, and overall wonderful folks. So follow them. And on the sides over here, I will have who's on the who's on the blue side and who's on the red side. Without further ado, let's start with our first game. We have Homolife versus LNG, or HLE versus LNG. Well, I wasn't expecting a Tryndamere mid on the first game of the tourney, so that's really interesting. The first day of cheese happens literally on game one. Now, it's really saying that the first game, being an LPL versus LCK matchup, would be a long drag decided by a team fight near the end. We could really feel the nervousness of both teams emanate through the screen. I was really hoping for a bit more proactivity from either side, and the timid approach really harmed the ability for both compositions to actualize. But Homolife, as many of the casters mentioned, benefited most from the slow gameplay. Unfortunately, the slow gameplay being in your favor only matters if you have control of the pacing at all points of the game. And LNG had that pacing the entire time, allowing them to be the first to the plays that were needed, deciding the positioning they want for fights, had better options for visions, dictated which objectives were going to be played for and what would be the focus most of the time, and had overall a better approach to the neutral objectives, which unfortunately, they didn't do so hot given that. Now, with it, honestly, I think LNG might have won faster if it wasn't some of the more unfortunate team fighting and positional mistakes that they had early on. It was cool that at the it was kind of interesting to watch, though, that the further they played, the less mistakes they had going through. But, the overall dynamic from it didn't feel very structured. But that can be expected from the first game, and the fact that both of these regions have such, they're standing on shoulders of giants, being the fourth seeds in this usually tends to the first game tends to match the mood of the first half of the tournament. I also thought that it was really interesting that every trend that our podcast or Worlds Watch had mentioned in our last episode or last two episodes came true for in terms of like enchanters being a bit more of a focus and assassin junglers. It was really nice. I gotta say that I don't think that the way that the game closed out was very solid on the side of LNG, but you gotta do what you gotta do. With that, LNG did win and are now up 1-0 after this game, and Humalife were down 0-1 after the end of this game. Next, we have Red Canids Kalunga versus Infinity Esports. And what a dynamic late game, kinda. Honestly, I was very impressed with this game regarding the approach to skirmish and team fightings that Red brought to the table. I thought that they would have a harder time doing the team fights starting the first couple of days. Was really hoping that they would not choke, and thankfully they did not. This is a team that had high expectations from it, and it's really nice to see that they still managed to pull off a win for them. Unfortunately, their scrimmage and team fighting mostly came at the cost of a fairly weak early game, some lackluster approaches to their neutrals, and visions that were like vision game that is passable, but very shallow. Granted, like the vision denial that they approached was solid, but it doesn't help all the time when, you know, if your vision itself does not match up from the like how much you deny from a vision, you don't go very far. Just knowing information is not the same as like denying it, but at the same time, if you don't know enough, then your denial of the vision is not going to bring you further. Infinity, on the other hand, properly recognized their win conditions, and I think they had a stronger draft overall and really utilize it to get leads and be proactive from early to mid game. It's just unfortunate that they seem to stall and falter at their approach to the late game transition and into the late game itself. They kept getting caught and opting into very suboptimal fights with equally, if not worse, vision, which is really unfortunate because they tend to have better neutral game or neutral objective approaches really early in during their mid game. And overall, I think Infinity also still impressed me regarding how they played. I was not expecting them to do well. Granted, like it's a mixed bag when it comes to a lot of these the emerging region teams to tell who is going to be better than who in terms of like power ranking. And so like you expecting either team to be better over the other is not something that I would be super surprised of. But I was expecting Infinity to do much worse going into this game, and I was kind of glad to see that they had control of the pacing for the vast majority of the time up until the transition to the late game. And like I put here, it doesn't matter how good your macro play is if you don't do the proper setups to avoid the mistakes like the ones that Infinity committed in this game. And unfortunately, they didn't do proper setups for going into their mid to late transition in the late game. With that, Brazil, your representatives, who are your newcomers, Red wins and are now 1-0 after this game, and Infinity goes 0-1. Now, next game, we have our LNG versus Peace. To say this was a competitive match would be a lie. LNG played with their food more than anything else, and as such, Peace played well to punish what they could, but heavily relied on the strength of their composition over actual macro play or individual strengths. And it really speaks volumes about the state of the LCO League, because a lot of the times the strength of the players and the compositions is usually what backs them up, and you can tell that this was a crutch that they had. Now, they had a very solid draft from Peace, and it was rather experimental on the side of LNG. Um, and it kind of showed, because with the result of this match came down to a huge skill gap that exists between the two teams. Um, LNG did keep up the strengths of their composition, approached it appropriately, but became mostly overzealous and did a lot of limit testing, which Peace was really good at recognizing and being able to punish, especially because at this stage of the tournament, it's still, sure, it's day one and it's still play-ins, so there's like an air of don't take it as seriously. But unfortunately, of the fact, like, since we know that legacy region teams can get kicked out from play-ins, you don't want to take those kinds of risks, right? You cannot go the approach of the RNG and MSI and just expect things to work out that way. Teams have majorly improved, and you were a fourth seed team, LNG. Now, Peace did show glimmers of hope that they'll be able to contend against the other lower seeded teams, but I don't think that they'll do well against Homolife. So there's not much else that I can expect. I don't expect them to beat Red or Infinity, but they do show glimmers of hope, and they do have the chance to surprise. LNG, however, on the pace that they're going, look like they're going on the pace to go 4-0. With that, LNG wins and are now 2-0, and Peace are at 0-1. Next up, and this is our fourth and last game of the day for the Group A, Homolife versus Infinity. And it was a really clumsy early and mid game that ended to a solid late game from Homolife. I have to say that the top teams are letting things slide. They shouldn't. Being favorites means that you should be taking things way more seriously, like I mentioned with LNG. Now, to what extent do I think they miss? Like, do I think that the mess ups they had? Do I think that Homolife would have lost to Infinity? I don't really think that any of the mess ups that they had would have cost them the game overall, but Infinity never really quite capitalized strongly enough with vision or weight pressure when they won fights from these punish for me to be convinced that it would undo all the proper macro setups and vision that was already done by Homolife at every turn. I'm also really bizarrely thrown off guard about the kind of team comp that Homolife picked. It felt very safe, but not safe in a way that was optimal to the meta. And it clearly showed that it was harder to approach the type of win condition that you needed to get this composition going. And that they had to really overextend to get things done for it. And Infinity recognized this pretty well. They did keep up, and it was a lot more than I expected from them in this tourney. And it's 2 for 2 in terms of how Infinity played, being a lot more impressive than what I expected. So given their scoreline, I would say that they're playing way better than I had hoped, and so that they have very good signs of life going in, that likely they could give LNG a run for their money if they clean up a little bit, and then I have no doubts that they'll probably be able to beat Peace. Given that, solid, simple drafting is usually a good sign that I see when emerging regions play. And that's what I've seen so far in this first 4 games, is that all of the emerging regions are doing solid, simple drafting for the most part. And they're here to try and upset, and that's great. Especially when the legacy teams are being sloppy on the first day, which is not a good sign. Guys, you're the top 2 of these 10 play-in teams. You need to clean it up. That said, Homolife wins and are now 1-1 at the end of the day, and Infinity are 0-2. Next up is our first of the 4 games for Group B. Our UOL, or Unicorns of Love, versus Detonation Focus Me. Now, not like I didn't see this coming. Unicorns played better than expected, but not enough to meet the expectation that I would have hoped for them to like improve for me to think that they were not going to be, destroyed. Now, drafting was fairly standard from what we've seen so far. It's only been 4 other games, so this 5th game in day 1 drafting was fairly standard overall. And Detonation Focus Me played a much more map aware approach to the game than their opponents, allowing them to have stronger neutral plays and better wave pressure when it came around to the time to play in the mid game. Neither team showed super strong team fighting this game, which is really unfortunate given that these two teams have made strides and really good, strong notes during their playoffs around team fighting. That being said, Detonation Focus Me held a better coordination across the board with their team, and UOL looked fairly lost. And that's really unfortunate because it doesn't look like that's going to be changing with the team. I do think that Detonation Focus Me needs to work on how they apply the win condition from their early game, as that was their weakest approach for this inaugural game of theirs, and UOL properly recognized this and really tried to tackle that approach. To which extent was it effective? I don't think it was very effective, but they did recognize that. And Detonation Focus Me, if they want to do better going forward, need to approach their early game win conditions with a little bit more vigor. Galactasaray versus Beyond Gaming. Now, I'm very disappointed, but I'm also largely impressed from this game. Mostly because Beyond Gaming, you have some questionable draft decisions that gave you very little to work in terms of win conditions. And Galactasaray recognized that and punished it incredibly well. They also kept up the pressure and ballooned the lead very slowly, all while avoiding as many fights as necessary. Now, this usually wouldn't work because the alternative response is a better proactive game, but Beyond Gaming as a team relies on punishing mistakes if they don't find early leads, and Galactasaray is an overly cautious team. With that, the logical consequence is that Beyond Gaming opt into bad fights and misposition, and Galactasaray tend to just take the opportunity from it. It worries me a little bit that GS or Galactasaray are slow on the uptick. They could still play a little bit more proactive in certain key moments while still being safe. And other teams would usually punish the hesitancy, especially if you're going to be playing against Cloud9 and Detonation, because when they see it, it's going to be easier to take control of the lack of proper pace control. Beyond Gaming, however, this is very bizarre for me, and it tends to show more of their best of 1 form from their regular season than their best of 5 form. I want to see Beyond Gaming play the same way they played when they recognized and actually studied the teams that they played against in their own league, and use Doggo more as like a key figure and not a backup. Draft more with him in mind. Granted, Galactasaray really impressed me. Hope this keeps up. They win and are now 1-0, and Beyond Gaming are 0-1. Next up, we have Detonation Focus Me versus Cloud9, the big rematch. It's not much of a rematch if they were tied when they last saw each other. Now, I'm a little bit surprised, but not super surprised at the result. I'm happy to see that Cloud9 are in form during this match. They didn't leave me with a good taste in my mouth at the end of their playoff run in North America in the LCS. That said, Detonation Focus Me were playing an uphill battle with this draft, and Cloud9, like Galactasaray, capitalized beautifully on this, and from each step of the game they had a very solid vision play, good neutral setups for their neutral objectives, having solid control over the dragon. They did great wave management and team fighting, and part of the whole process is the draft having a huge factor. The other is Detonation Focus Me is not responding properly to the play's cross map. Or at least they didn't approach their win conditions in any efficient manner. It really became disheartening to look at this team see go for more comfort picks, but not actually approach their comfort picks in a way that would allow them to gain many leads, and to just kind of throw to the wayside whatever was happening on the top side of the map. And I'm hoping this doesn't become a trend for Detonation Focus Me, because quite honestly, this could become a bigger problem for them down the line. And given that they still have to play Galactasauri, who are looking fairly solid at this point, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to them, I hope that they clean it up a little bit. That being said, Cloud9 do close out this game very well, and if they keep up this particular pace, where they're strongly understanding their win conditions, that they've done a lot of preparations for this, and that they make sure to have proper fundamentals going through this game, I wouldn't be surprised if Cloud9 close out the group undefeated and make it to groups, or close out the play-in group undefeated and go to the groups with no issues. Cloud9 win with this one and are now 1-0, while Detonation Focus Me are now 1-1. Unicorns of Loves versus Galactasauri. Guys, I'm so impressed with Galactasauri on day one of for their day one performance. It's fairly solid. UOL have played as expected, and I find that the draft from them really hinders their ability to answer anything their opponents bring and set up, which is a little unfortunate since Unicorns of Love do show an understanding of what their win conditions are in this game, but their lack of coordination, slow movement around the map, poor vision, and neutral setup made it very easy for Galactasauri to come in with some solid fundamentals and a much more proactive game this time around. I also like that Galactasauri closed the game out much better and faster than the previous one, and it indicates a good read on their opponents and solid pivots from game to game to improve. And to me, that gives me a better sign that even if they don't make it to the top spot undefeated or make the first slot in their play-in group, that when they get to the best of 5 section of the tournament, that they will have a good approach to their best of 5, which is drastically different from their playoffs. And I've mentioned it before, I wouldn't be surprised if they take games off of Detonation Focus Me and C9 by surprise and secure their first place, but that would be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Galactasaurus wins and are now 2-0, and you all are 0-2. Now, I'm going to dedicate a bit of the end of the video here, because I don't want these videos to be too long. These are supposed to be short recaps more than anything else, to get my thoughts out there and for people to think, or for people to know, for those who watch, what I think about the general overall vibe or the mood of the day-to-day games that happen. Like that, so like that there's some context for when we talk about this in our podcast. And so far, day one is not an exciting set of games. For the most part, you can watch what I would say the more exciting games are the games that Galactasauri have played. I think those are fun games to watch, and I think they have a very good approach and understanding of what the meta looks like coming into the tournament. I think that the Hummel Life versus LNG game is a fun game, mostly in terms of it being very reminiscent of like the history of the two regions. And I think it's important to watch also because these are the standard. Like, this is the 4 seed from the 2 best regions so far. So watching it is not a bad time, or not a non-recommended thing to do. But it is very slow. It is it is the longest game that was in the day, and it was not very exciting. I do think that for those who are from Brazil, you should be happy with the result that Red had, but it was their only game of the day. And so we should be expecting at least positive results for the next days, but cautiously positive results. And by positive, I mean not necessarily beating the top two teams of their group, but being competitive with them. I don't have much to say about the two teams that I had ranked the lowest. In out of all of the 22 teams, Peace and Unicorns have both played exactly as I expected, with an asterisk. I do think that it's promising that there is some improvement compared to their playoff runs. But I don't think that they're going to be able to pivot from the day 1 to day 2 or day 3 matches that come in, which is a little unfortunate because they do show some promise. I'm a little disappointed by the approach that Detonation Focus Me brought in to today's matches. They seemed a little disjointed, more so than usual. And I don't know if that's because of jitters or because of any particular type of nervousness, but I hope it does clear up. And beyond gaming, I'm disappointed by their first game, but granted, it is still their first game. There's nothing about it that would indicate to me that they are doing way worse than what we would expect, given how it is still a young team. This is still the first year that they exist. And so coming in and losing to a team that's playing significantly better than expected, I would not count them out quite yet. And Cloud9 is also playing much better than I expected. And I'm hoping that at least Cloud9 shows some momentum that keeps through, because there's not a lot of hope for North America going into the group stages. And maybe this will show a better indication of things to come. I think that covers most of the teams. Yes, it does. The day tomorrow will start off with, again, Group A, but Peace versus Hummel Life. Now, I do hope that Hummel Life does finish this up faster, but we'll see. A lot of the days are going to be super long compared to usual Worlds Plays days. But that's up to all of us to see how it goes. You guys let me know. Are there any games that you would recommend? Let us know in the comments. I would put in, I would again reiterate, the first game of the day is something that I would recommend, but only if you have the time and the patience for it. Otherwise, the Galactasara games, both of them, are fun times and a great, exciting time to see a team we expected very little of to show up big. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, do like and subscribe. I'll be doing one of these every day that there are games that are played, including the best of 5 days, and even if we do one before our podcast. Let us know if there's anything that you would like us to cover, which for our Vision Denial podcast for Worlds 2021. And I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.